and then I saw a marker on the side of the path to a pilgrim who had died at that spot, trying to get up the Camino. And I kind of realized that it put my challenges in perspective, because I realized that, a lot of folks would love to trade their challenges with me that day. And even though I was having a bad day on the Camino, I was on the Camino. And the lesson for me was that even when you have a bad day doing something you love, it's better than most days doing something you don't.
What is going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining yours truly, Ryan Caligari, on this week's episode of Cut the Crap Podcast, where every single week I'm reading a book, condensing it down to its core golden nuggets. I'm bringing the author on the show to have a conversation about the golden nuggets, and I'm here with you every single week, just trying to save you a little bit of time and bring you some information that can spark real change in your life. So what are we talking about this week? This week we have the book, The Camino Way, Lessons in Leadership from a Walk Across Spain with Victor Prince. Now, Victor is not the only person that we've had on the show who has also taken this walk, the walk of the El Camino del Santiago. We had on John Izzo a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that in the podcast as well, where these two individuals, they actually walked this path for 30 days. And as they walked this path, they came to a whole bunch of realizations that helped them in business, in life, with their relationships. And I find it very interesting. And at the end of this interview, after talking to John, I really didn't feel the urge to walk it. But obviously this one here, the Camino Way, it's all about this walk and the leadership lessons that he learned on the way. Now I feel interested enough to go and do this walk myself to see what kind of inspiration I can pull from it. In any case, it's an interesting interview. Lots of good takeaways from this. So give it a listen. Let me know what you think. And I'll catch you back here at the end of the episode. Enjoy. Victor, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Thanks so much for coming on the show and for making time for myself and everyone out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation. And I'm excited to get you on the show today because this is an interesting book. And this is a book that digs deep into your thought process, how you changed while doing this walk across Spain. And interesting enough, you're not the first one to be on Cut the Crap Podcast who has done this walk before. And a couple weeks ago, we had on author John Izzo talking about the 5 Thieves of Happiness. And he too walked the Camino Way and found it was very inspiring. And for him, he changed who he was as a person. So now that we're digging into this book, I'd really like to understand, how that changed you. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. But before you get really into the book and we start talking about that, maybe introduce yourself to Cut the Crap Podcast Nation. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you wrote the book in the first place.
Well, this is my third book, so I'm an author, a speaker, a trainer, and a coach, all with focusing on leadership. Because I worked in the government and corporate space for about 20 years, and then about 5 years ago, I started writing books and doing training and coaching around that as well. So it's been a fun ride.
So when you first started doing your walk across Spain, for example, like what drew you to that in particular, and why was it so? I don't know, maybe life-changing is too big, but from what I've heard and what I've seen and obviously what I've read, is it is life-changing. So why did that happen?
Well, what's funny is I do trails for a hobby. So I mostly on bikes, but I've done trails all over the world. And the reason I did the Camino really had nothing to do with the spiritual part of the trail or anything. I just did it because it was one of the few places on earth where you can hike for 30 days without camping.
Gotcha.
I don't want to carry it. I don't want to carry a tent and food and sleep outside. So that I kind of stumbled into it that way. But
right.
I did it just because it was a trail, but it ended up being much more than that.
Yeah, you did it. So you did it for the challenge, and you're not alone on that one. Apparently, this one just attracts tens of thousands of people every single year. And what is it about this trail in particular that really draws people out every single year? Is it because it's just the challenge like you, or is it the spiritual aspect? Is it a little bit of A, a little bit of B?
Yeah, it's a combination I found of a physical challenge, and it's also this combination of you get this alone time with yourself to kind of reflect on your past and kind of what your hopes and dreams are. But then you combine that with you meet people from around the world, and then you share this intense experience with them, and it becomes, I think that's what makes it a life-changing experience for a lot of people who do it, because it helps them both reflect upon themselves but learn so much about others. And in many ways that that's a great way to learn about yourself, is by meeting others as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of where the book came about. And it's a collection of a lot of your lessons that you've learned through that walk. And what we're going to do today, Cut the Crap Podcast Nation, is we're going to focus on 7 golden nuggets, 7 takeaways. And essentially a lot of these come with stories that, Victor took from his walk through Spain. So why don't we cut right into this one, Victor? And let's go to golden nugget number 1,
Sure.
which says that welcome each day, its pleasures and its challenges. So this is all about setting reasonable goals and celebrating small pleasures along the way. So how did you come to this lesson in particular?
Yeah, so I'll just introduce briefly the 7 lessons themselves. I kind of stumbled on them because every pilgrim gets a credential or a passport, and you get these stamped as you go along the way to prove that you walk the walk, and it allows you to get into the hostels, and it's what you use to get your certificate at the end. And then, so, the first couple of days I was really focused on getting my stamp collection. But then about 3 or 4 days in, I looked on the back of that credential, and there are these 7 values that pilgrims are supposed to live by while they're on the trail. And they really struck me because they weren't religious and they weren't particularly complex, but they just, they struck a tone with me. And then as I walked, I reflected on these and just thought, geez, I wish I really lived these values as I was a manager and a leader in the corporate and government world, and that's kind of where we went. And so the first one of those, as you mentioned, is welcome each day its pleasures and its challenges. And I usually describe this by sharing a story. So every day on the Camino, when you're walking about 15 miles, 25 kilometers a day for 32 days to get across Spain, so every day is full of challenges and pleasures. And in some ways, the most challenging day I had was about day 8 or so, maybe day 10. And it was the day, because the day before I had to walk 24 miles in one day. Oof. And the reason I did that was because I screwed up in my planning, and I kind of I jammed two days together into one. So, the next morning I wake up and I'm sore as can be. I'm mad at myself for making that dumb mistake. And then the whole day I started. This is July in Spain, and I start the day, and for like the first 2 hours, I'm just staring at this hill that I have to go over. It's just like taunting me ahead of me, and it's a pretty hot day in July in Spain. And then, but I just had that moment, and I was like, what on earth am I doing? There's no way I'm going to be able to walk across Spain. This is a pretty crazy thing to do. But I kept walking, and I got about halfway up that hill, and then I saw a marker on the side of the path to a pilgrim who had died at that spot, trying to get up the Camino. And I kind of realized that it put my challenges in perspective, because I realized that, a lot of folks would love to trade their challenges with me that day. And even though I was having a bad day on the Camino, I was on the Camino. And the lesson for me was that even when you have a bad day doing something you love, it's better than most days doing something you don't.
Absolutely.
So I kept going up the hill, and then when I got to the top of the hill, there was just this gorgeous view for miles and miles of the path stretching and turning. And I took a picture, and in many ways that picture changed my life, because when I got back, I wrote a blog about the Camino, and I used that picture as kind of the headline. And that blog went viral worldwide and snowballed into this book deal. And so when I had to come to dedicate the book, I ended up dedicating it to the man whose name was on that marker on the side, Jose G. Valina, because he didn't make it to the top of the hill to see that site, but he helped me get there. And by doing so, he changed my life. So That was a real lesson I learned about. Really welcome the challenges every day, because if you're doing something you love, the challenges are a good part of it.
No kidding. It's a great story, man, to kick things off. And again, this is what we talk about a lot on Cut the Crap Podcast, is this idea of perspective shift. With you found small pleasures that really motivated yourself, that motivated the pilgrims. And, you start your day, before breakfast, and you started off on the right note. And, you look at people who have jobs, and people who are probably going on into their work right now. Either you're probably in the gym, on the subway, in your car, maybe you're walking to work, on the bus, whatever. And you're thinking, oh, man, I got to go to this job, and I don't really want to do this. And,
right.
This is all about really perspective shift and finding joy in the fact that you have a job. There's a lot of people out there who don't have jobs. A lot of people out there who wish they could be working
Absolutely.
right now. And you have to have that perspective shift to realize that, I got to be grateful for what I have right now, because there's a lot of people who maybe don't have what I have. And maybe I should be blessed. And shift your perspective. Think about the first day that you started the job, how excited you were. And there's so many different people out there and different experience that we have is very negative. And the reason why I like this story is because it helps us bring us back to center and helps us to, again, provide us with a little bit of perspective. So really glad we opened up the podcast with that very powerful story. That's awesome, man. So golden
Great. Well said, Ryan. You said it well, too.
So with golden nugget number 2, we talk about making others feel welcome. So at some point during your career, this is what you talked about in the book, you stopped making small talk during meetings at your company. And the Camino, what it did was it shifted your perspective again, and it reminded you to greet people in a meaningful way. So talk to us about the importance of making others feel welcome.
Yeah, so that, the story I share in the book is kind of like a before versus after. So before, when I was the COO of a big government agency, I'd chair a lot of meetings, and then I'd really focus on getting through the agenda and diving right in. And then what I realized was that, for a lot of the people who were kind of presenting that day, they may have been working for, weeks on their presentation, and they didn't get a chance to, sit down with the COO and others pretty often. So I felt pretty bad after that because I wasn't taking the time to make them feel welcome to that meeting. I was just digging right in. So that was a kind of a before story. So when I was on the Camino, I learned the power of making others feel welcome in a really powerful way. And there's a story to that. So one night, about a third of my way in the Camino is when my blisters started hitting me, because every pilgrim kind of fights with blisters. And then I limped to this little town called Nahara. And as I went out to dinner, and I showed some other pilgrims my blisters, because if you go this is what pilgrims do. They show each other their blisters, and they have all kinds of, all kinds of strategies. So the other pilgrim said, those look like they're getting infected, and you should go to the pharmacy down the road and get something for those. And there was only one pharmacy in town, so I limped there. And when I got there, the store was closed. There was a sign on the door that said closed, and I didn't knock, but there was an older gentleman in there cleaning up. And he came to the door, and he cracked the door open, and he just said one word to me. He said, "Peregrino," which is the Spanish word for pilgrim. And I said, "See," and I showed him my blister as a way to tell him what I needed, because I didn't learn that word in high school Spanish. So he said, "Un momento," and he pushed this button on a box outside the door. And about 5, maybe 10 minutes later, a very irritated pharmacist showed up, and she asked me what heart medication I needed, and I said, no, I just got a blister, and so she gave the old man a really dirty look and said some words that they don't teach you in Spanish, but she gave me the prescription, and the old man was like, I didn't understand the American, sorry. But then after she gave me the prescription, the old man walked me to the door, and as we got to the door, he winked at me, and he shook my hand with a conspiratorial smile and said, "Buen Camino." So that old man knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he was going to get in trouble, but he decided to, he saw a stranger in need, and he decided to be a kind stranger. So that's a lesson that I learned, because what I learned is had I not gotten those blisters treated, I may not have finished my Camino, and had I not finished the Camino, I certainly wouldn't have written a book about it. So that really small act of kindness on his part had a huge impact on me, and that's something that I try to keep in mind as I see strangers in need going forward.
No kidding. So that, again, another powerful story. And I love that story in particular because it kind of had a nice little twist to it that I didn't really see coming. So what kind of advice do you have to somebody, or, somebody who's talking to you, and you would apply this to somebody who's going into work today? How would you apply this story to somebody who's maybe going into work today and you want them to make others feel welcome?
Yeah, one of the big things is, if you're a leader at work, it's really make that expectation clear for your folks that, hey, let's make sure that we're making people feel welcome. And some simple things you can do there is just have protocols and some other things. So if someone comes in after hours, they call in, they've got a problem. Well, here's how we resolve that. I remember one time I was at work, and it was after hours, and somehow the call center rolled to my desk, and it was after hours, but the person had a complaint. And I took the note and all that stuff, and I walked it down to the call center to work on that next morning, because the guy didn't know that he had the COO instead of a CSR on the phone, but I wanted to make sure that he knew that we treated his call with respect and made him feel welcome. So I think the biggest thing leaders can do is lead by example.
With golden nugget number 3, we talk about living in the moment. Now, again, this is something that I think a lot of us struggle with today, and myself especially. And I loved reading in the book how you loaded your phone up with audiobooks. And for myself, if I was to do the walk one day, I'd probably load it up with podcasts, and you load it up with audiobooks for listening while you're walking. And on your first day, when you first started, you decided that you would wait until you were bored to listen. Did you end up listening? Yes or no? Lead us through that story and tell us the leadership lesson behind living in the moment.
Yeah, you're absolutely. So I had hundreds of hours of audiobooks, and then I just waited to put the headphones in, and I never ended up putting those headphones in the whole 30 plus days of walking. And in many ways that changed my Camino. In some ways, changed my life, because what I found is that when you don't have these white earbuds in your ear, it does two things. So the first thing it does is it makes you pay attention to the rest of the world, because you've got to find other ways to entertain yourself. And if you let yourself, there's plenty of things out there that will, plenty of things to engage in. But I think even in some ways, the more important thing is when you take those earbuds out, you're more open for other people to talk to you. You don't look like you're distant. So, I ended up making friends from all over the world on the Camino, and one in particular that, really changed my life. So it kind of makes me shudder to think, had I had my headphones in on the Camino, I wouldn't have met these people, and my life would be forever changed. So it's just, just unplug sometimes and really just let the world kind of happen to you and be in the moment is a big, powerful lesson I learned that way.
Yeah, you removed your earphones, and I love that in the book. You call them weapons of mass distraction. And by removing those on your hike, it really opened you up and made you more aware of the people around you and more open to having conversations or paying attention to certain things that maybe you wouldn't have been paying attention to because you got those things in your ear and you're paying attention to the audiobook and maybe you found something that was interesting. And not to say it's a bad thing, but to me, I believe that people really need to separate the two. When I'm jogging on a treadmill, or for example, if I'm riding in a car or a subway, I think it's a great opportunity for me to keep my earbuds in and to learn something while I'm really staying stationary. But for yourself, when you're in this experience, you want to make sure that you're taking in that experience to the fullest. And it's something that, yours truly will try to work on. And then I'm going to try to really put into practice as I move forward. Because for anybody who knows me, you know that I always have my Apple AirPods on and I'm always listening to something. It's always an audiobook or a podcast or something. And I pride myself on that because I always learn. But the one thing that I do know about, and that, the big leadership lesson from your book that really resonated with me was that I'm always distracted. And the fact that I'm not really living in the moment. I'm living through my phone. I'm living through that episode. And my mind is not really active on what's happening in front of me. And this happens all the time, and it happened just last week where I was sitting there listening to a podcast, and I was so engaged in the podcast. That's where my mind was. And then I had this friend who walked by, and I hadn't seen them in years, and they waved to me. I didn't even see them wave to me, and I was like, afterwards, I had no idea. Afterwards, they hit me up on Facebook, and they're like, Ryan, did you know that I waved today? And I was like, I had no idea. Where'd you wave to me? And they said, I waved to you walking down the street here. And at that moment in time, I was really deep into an audiobook and I wasn't really paying attention. And so again, that was an opportunity to talk to somebody that I hadn't seen in about 15 years that I really would have loved to talk to, but I really missed it because I wasn't living in the moment. And I'm not to say that, you're all going to have similar experiences, but I think it's an important lesson to sometimes, take in and say, maybe unplug and pay attention to the small things around you. Almost like smell the flowers, feel the breeze through your in my case, I don't have hair, but feel it through my face or feel it through my beard, But this idea of living in the moment is a very important lesson that I think a lot of us need to remember. So golden nugget number 4, very simple, share. So talk to us about I'm gonna butcher this, man, but talk to us about the Bodegas Irach Winery and the leadership lesson from that one.
Yeah, so it's, on the Camino, pilgrims end up sharing a lot of things with each other. You share food, you share stories, and in many cases you share kind of beds in like these big communal hostels as well. So you see examples of sharing everywhere, and my favorite one was this wine shop. So I was actually a winery. So part of the Camino goes through the beautiful wine regions of Navarra and Rioja, and then as you walk to this one, there's a wine fountain, and it's free wine, red and white wine for pilgrims. So you kind of I sat down there and I filled my water bottle up and chatted with some other folks who were sitting there as well, and after like drinking the water bottle full of wine, the hike went a little bit slower that day, but after I left there though, I enjoyed it, but then my MBA brain kicked in and I was like, why on earth would this winery do this? It just seems like it's a hassle and probably not a good idea. But then I started figuring out that, the winery, all they'd basically done is they happen to have a distribution facility right on the Camino. So all they did is they basically poked a hole in the wall, and they were sharing wine that probably wasn't their most expensive, and they had no transportation costs. So it was basically almost free for them to share it. But when they were sharing it, it was given enormous value to pilgrims because it was just a real lift and made us feel valued and welcome on the trail. So I kind of realized that what they were doing is they had found a profitable giveaway. So this winery figured out something that they were sitting on that wasn't really a lot of cost to them, but when they gave it away, it created enormous value. And then I think that's a big lesson for leaders and companies and elsewhere, which is think about where you can share experiences or things with your customers that really don't cost you anything, but would give the customer a big benefit. And one of my favorite examples, I think, in the U.S. in sports is, in baseball, when a ball player kind of throws a baseball in the stands to a kid, that baseball costs the team nothing, but it becomes a priceless memento for that kid. And just, think about places like where you can do that and share value that way, that doesn't really cost you much, but creates enormous values for others. Yeah,
this is for my marketing people out there. This is one of the things that I love most when it comes down to marketing and special events, for example. I like to really connect with my customers, with my prospects, and I'll connect with them as people and learn a little bit about them. And we'll do things like a sushi making event, or we'll make Thai food together, or there's all these different types of events locally that you can do that really don't cost you a lot, but it really brings an opportunity to bring you together. And those in particular, I really, really love. And this was a nice reminder of that, to ensure that those are in my marketing strategy, and things that are definitely of high value to our customers, but really don't cost us a whole lot in the end. So this is a really nice takeaway for the marketers out there. I love it. Golden nugget number 5, feel the spirit of those who have come before you. So again, this we kind of talked about a little bit. We alluded to this one originally when you talked about, again, Jose Givalino and the experience and how that really changed you. And I can really understand how that would have an impact on you, where you sit down and you just reflect on it and you say, wow, like this man walked the exact same path that I did, and he didn't have the pleasure of making it up the hill and seeing the sunrise that I did. And that moment in particular, when I read that in the book, that resonated with me. Now, if I was there, man, would that have a really impactful message and an impact on me, essentially. So maybe talk to us again about this golden nugget number 5, the idea of feel the spirit of those who have come before you.
Yeah, so what's one of the neat things about the Camino is people have been walking this trail for over 1,000 years. So, the trails actually survived through all the wars in Europe, through all the religious changes and all that kind of stuff. It even kind of thrived during the Black Plague in the 1300s.
Wow.
So there's just so much history on this trail that you're walking in the steps that Roman legionnaires walked in, that pilgrims from 1,000 years have walked. And then so you can't help but feel the power of these folks. But I kind of learned the power of feeling those who've gone before you in a different way, which was when I decided to walk the trail. I kind of said, all right, I'm going to start here and I'm going to end here. And I knew I had about 450 miles to go, and I knew I had about 30 days to do it. So I figured out, I got a map, and I looked at all the places because I didn't want to camp. Mm-hmm. So I looked at all the little towns about 15 miles apart, and it became a big kind of trade-off because some days you have to walk less, some days you have to walk more, but if you get too far from 15 miles a day, it really kind of messes up the whole plan. So it took me, I built this big spreadsheet out, and I listed all the cities, the little towns along the way, and I found places to stay and made reservations and all this kind of stuff. And it took me several days, and by the end of it, I had this really big spreadsheet, and I was really proud of myself because when I went to business school at Wharton, they taught us this thing called linear programming, which is how to do trade-off models and stuff. And it was never useful in the real world, but I finally had a chance to use it, and I was really proud of myself. And then just before I left, I said I should probably get a map. So I bought a book with a map in it, and then I opened the book up, and I realized, they had done the trail in these 30-day stages. So day 1 was basically what I had figured out. Day 2 was the same. So by going through this massive analysis, I recreated this book. And I wasn't feeling the spirit of those who'd gone before me, because if I were smart, I would have thought that, if people have been walking this trail for 1,000 years, someone's probably come up with a pretty good route and pretty good itinerary. But, I kind of dug in because I figured I'm a smart guy. I know how to get data and do research. So I dug right in. And that, to me, that's a really powerful lesson for work, too, because, a lot of times when we get a new project or something, we just want to really just jump and start right in and get moving. But in some ways, the smartest thing we can do is just kind of take a step back at first and say, has anyone else done this before? Let me see who I can talk to learn and get their perspective instead of just charging forward. So that was a really powerful way for me to think about those who've come before me at work.
Yeah, that in particular, again, it's a lesson that resonated with me. And I know it's going to resonate with a lot of you out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation. But the challenge with this lesson is that it's a hard lesson to learn. And what I mean by that is a lot of times our ego gets in the way. And we think that we know more than we do. And I'm talking to a lot of you millennials out there, and I'm a millennial too, so I can say that. But we believe that we know better a lot of the times. And that, listen, the people who have come before us, they came through a different world, man. They don't understand us. I think I can get this. I think I can figure this out. And I've told this story on the podcast before, where I was working with one of my marketing mentors, Chet Holmes, many, many years ago. And Chet and we were talking about a campaign that I was running, and he offered me his suggestion, and despite the fact that I went to him to ask him to be my mentor, and I asked him for help, but I disagreed with him. I said, listen, Chet, I think you're wrong, man. I think I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to go ahead and execute in this fashion. And he said, listen, man, if you go ahead and execute like that, I'm not going to stop you, because you got to learn your lessons. But what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to write on a piece of paper these top 7 things that are going to happen to you, that are going to go wrong on your campaign. I'm going to send it to you by mail. Do not open this letter up until your campaign is done and you failed. And I started laughing. I'm like, okay, man, whatever you say, kind of thing, ignorant, young smart ass. So he sends it to me by mail. I keep it on my desk. I execute dramatically, or it was a fantastic failure, the campaign, just as he thought. So as we're sitting there talking on our coaching call, he goes, hey, by the way, open up that letter. As I open up the letter, he nails all 7 things that went wrong. And I laugh. I'm like, Matt, how did you know? He's like, I've been there, man. I've been in the trenches. I've walked the path. He's like, you're just so stubborn and so, hard-headed. You didn't want to take a minute just to listen to me. And I felt like that was such a powerful example right there. And I'm so grateful that he taught me that lesson. I constantly tell that story because it was just so impactful for me. But a lot of us aren't going to have experiences like that. A lot of us are going to listen, or are going to work with a coach, or work with a VP, or a manager, a director, or somebody who's been in an organization for a long time. And we're going to listen to what they say, but we're going to say, I know better than you. The idea of feel the spirit of those who have come before you, it's all about learning from those who have essentially more experience than us, people who have been there, done that, people who know the game better. I think that this is one of the toughest things to do, is to drop our ego and to say, hey, maybe I need to ask more questions from this person. Maybe I need to be more curious. Maybe I need to listen more. Maybe I need to try something that they're suggesting and see how that works. But I'm telling you, people out there, everyone out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation, if you can really take this one to heart and learn from those who have come before you, I think it's going to make you it's going to make you a stronger professional. And I think you're going to learn a lot of lessons from people who have definitely come before you. Golden nugget number 6, appreciate those who walk with you today. So before we're talking, or in the last golden nugget, we're talking about people who have walked before us, but now we're talking about people who walk with us today. So share with us the story around this one and the leadership lesson from it.
Yeah, so it's neat when you walk the trail. You're walking with people from all different countries and all different ages and all different backgrounds. But in some ways, the most impactful story for me on my first Camino was I was walking with a woman, and she had her little dog with her. So it was kind of like a dachshund, tiny little legs. And the first day we walked together, it was a nice shady day and the clouds everywhere. And the dog was running around chasing butterflies, and we had a heck of a time. The next day, the sun came out, and that poor little dog, instead of chasing butterflies, was basically looking for puddles to lay in to cool off. And I realized that dog probably wasn't going to survive if we kept, she wanted to keep walking for another few hundred miles. So I confronted her, and I said, hey, maybe you need to carry the dog or adjust your plans or take the dog home. And then, but she said she wouldn't do that. So then I had to do kind of the most dramatic thing that one pilgrim can do to another, which is to say, well, I'm not going to walk with you anymore unless you take care of that dog. And then she didn't. So I ended up, I said, I left her. And then about a day or two later, I heard from other pilgrims that she had gone back and taken the dog back home. Awesome. So the lesson for me in that one was, as leaders, we walk with a lot of different people, but we've got a real responsibility to look out for the most vulnerable among us, because, that poor little dog couldn't speak for itself, couldn't say that this wasn't a good thing, but I could. And I felt that moral obligation to speak up for that dog. And I think that's an important thing at work as well, in the workplace, which is, think about those who are with us, who are vulnerable, and we really have an obligation to kind of to look out for them. And and speak up for them when they may not be able to do it for themselves.
It really comes down to having compassion and really caring for your fellow coworker, your peers. And far too often we get caught up and we don't think about that. We get caught up in climbing the corporate ladder or I just got to get this project done. And we don't think about people's feelings, their emotions, their story, where they came from, how are they feeling. And, I think about a lot of the people that I work with today and the challenges they have. And, for example, when their performance slips, it's so easy for us to just say, oh man, like you're just lazy, you're stupid, you don't get it. And we don't exercise this idea of compassion. But, when we think about the people who are with us right now and that we're working with them, it's what's the underlying cause? What's the reason for it? And, I'm not going to get into deep stories because I know a lot of people listen to the podcast, but there's a lot of people that I work with who are going through some really tough stuff at home. And, instead of just getting hard on them on the project, sit down with them and have a conversation. So some of these people, I'll sit down and I'll have coffee with them and I'll understand where they're coming from. And by being just an ear to them, by listening to them, hearing them out, it really helps them and it gives them an opportunity to open up. And I don't know why, man, but I never surprises me just how impactful just listening to people is and opening up, your door to people who are having challenges and being somebody who's very receptive to that. People really respect that and they really love that. And, it's one of those things that I think I do very well is that I just care a lot about people and very in tune with people's emotions and where they're coming from and the reason for how they feel certain ways. And I think that it's not something that we do too much. We don't really exercise compassion in the workplace. And I definitely think that that's a lesson from the book that will help us not become, it'll definitely help us become better leaders, but of course it's going to help us become better people as well. So I really love that. Appreciate those who walk with you today. Now, as we wrap this one up, golden nugget number 7, the last lesson here is imagine those who will follow you. So again, we're talking about looking forward and really learning from people who've come before us. We talk about compassion and working and learning from people who are walking with us right now, but now we have to think about people who will follow us, people who will come after us. So talk to us about this one and the leadership lesson from it.
Yeah, in many ways, I think this is one of the biggest lessons of the Camino, because the Camino, as I mentioned, has been around for 1,000 years, and there aren't really many things that have survived for 1,000 years and are thriving like the Camino is today. And I think the real lesson for that is because pilgrims, as they walk it, they know that there's going to be someone, 5 minutes behind them, 5 years behind them, even probably 5 centuries behind them on the Camino. So pilgrims have this ethos that they want to leave the trail in as good a shape or even better than they found it. So you tend not to see a whole lot of litter on the trail. People kind of take care of the hospitals that they stay in, and they help each other out. And I think this is a really important lesson for leaders in business and elsewhere too, because when you think about your job, hopefully you're not the last person who's going to be in your job. Your organization's going to, continue and thrive after you retire or move on to another job or something else. So as leaders, we have a real obligation, I think, to make sure that the actions we take and the decisions we make and other things that we do are setting up our successors for success. So, it's important to make sure we're making the right investments, make sure that we're really thinking about the precedents we're setting and things like that, because, we're kind of a caretaker for the role that we have today, but we have to leave it in even better shape for those who follow us down the road.
Well, I realized this, it's funny, after reading this one, I really realized this one many, many years ago, where I knew that I wouldn't be in that organization forever. I was on a contract, and the contract was going to end in 2 years. So, the way I looked at this and my perspective on it was, I'm going to leave this better than when I first came to it. And I'm going to tell people, my journey along the way. When the next person comes in, and the marketing director comes in here, and they take over the job, I want them to understand, essentially, in more terms of this book, the path that I walked. And what I did was I outlined, sort of a document of lessons learned along the way. And the lessons learned document to me was so important that it ended up starting off as just this one-page thing with some bullet notes. And then I started to get a little bit longer with my stories. And at the end of it, I had maybe about 30 pages of just, 10-point font lessons learned in this role. And it was something that my client now continues to do with all roles, whether you're a project manager or whether you're a designer, whether you're a new VP coming in. He wants you to capture your lessons learned because it'll help the other people who come after you learn from the things that you've gone through. And everyone who starts the job, as part of your onboarding, you have to read the lessons learned from those who have come before you. And it was all because I just wanted to kick that off. And I love that. And it's good stimulus for everybody out there who maybe wants to, take this idea of imagine those who will follow you and turn it into something very tangible in your office. How many of you have a lessons learned document? How many of you have a lessons learned charter where in your role, every time you learn a lesson, every time you experience some sort of pain, you have to write down the lesson in that. And that lesson can then be shared with your coworkers, with people who come after you. But that by itself is something I truly love, something I very much value, and something that I continue to do today, and something that I want all of you out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation to learn from. And again, this really is backed up by this last leadership lesson from you. Imagine those who will follow you. That is, my friends, the Camino Way, Lessons in Leadership from a Walk Across Spain by Victor Prince. And man, Victor, thank you so much for coming on this show. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing a lot of these lessons with everyone out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation. And many of these lessons are very easy to put into practice. And for us, it's just a dedication to continually bettering ourselves. And there's a lot of things here that will help us become better leaders, but especially better human beings. So for anybody who wants to read this book, or for anyone who wants to read more about what you're doing or follow you online, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, the best way is my website, so victorprince.com. And then so you can find this book and my other books. And then I'm also on the tour for the book, because the book's coming out in Spanish this month, and it comes out in Korean and Chinese after that. So you can see all about that on victorprince.com.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, again, Victor, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much for making time for myself and for everyone out there in Cut the Crap Podcast Nation. It's a true pleasure.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to talk to you.
All right, there we have it. That's The Camino Way, Lessons in Leadership from a Walk Across Spain with Victor Prince. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then please go online, rate and review the show. Don't forget to send the rating, the review to podcast@ryancalajuri.com. Just take a screen capture of it, send it to me, and I'll make sure you get into the draw every quarter for a prize. And I will let you know what that prize is very shortly, so stay tuned for that. Also, don't forget to connect me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and just say hi. Tell me you found me through the podcast, and if you've already connected to me, then just please send me a quick line, send me a quick note. I know so many of you do that all the time, and I love it when you do that. So please don't hesitate just to say hi. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you're working on, because I'm always interested in hearing who's out there listening. All right, everybody, that is a wrap for this week. So thank you so much once again for tuning in. I will catch you back here next week when I have a brand new book, brand new golden nuggets, an interview with an author, and of course, every single week, you know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to save you a little bit of time and bring you some information that can spark real change in your life. Have an awesome, productive, inspired week, everybody. I love you all.
A warrior is a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of being. Carlos Castaneda says we choose only once, to be warriors or ordinary. We choose only once because choosing to be a warrior alters your fundamental approach to life. While others will view everything as a blessing or a curse, you will see only challenges. And a warrior lives to overcome challenges. Every warrior has a code, an ethos. It is an invisible thread that connects him to all of his warrior brothers and sisters since the beginning of time. Stephen Pressfield asks, how do we find our true calling, our soul companions, our destiny? He answers, in this task, our greatest ally is the warrior ethos. A warrior never hopes, but yet he must have faith. Hope is powerless, useless. The longer we sit in hope, the more time we waste. Because the universe gives only what is sought, only what is believed. Because at times not every path is clear and not every enemy a fire and dragon. When the forest is dark, the warrior holds his ground with faith that if he remembers the warrior code, the light to illuminate the darkness will come. For the warrior, the body is as important as the mind, for the two are inseparable. Daniel Bolelli writes, a person who knows there's a wild wolf living under his skin is less likely to be intimidated by reality. When the mind is in doubt, the body provides tangible proof. A warrior is not an ascetic. He does not deny himself the pleasures of conquest simply for the sake of denying them. He realizes that in doing so, it is easy to think he is doing great things when really he is just focused on himself. But neither is he attached to these pleasures. He can walk away from them at any time. Sometimes he does, just to prove it to himself. The warrior is a natural leader, and he leads under one principle: follow me. When Alexander the Great was threatened with mutiny after years of brutal campaigning in India, he stepped forward, stripped off his armor, and challenged his men. Bring forth a man who has bled more than me, and we will go home. No one stepped forth, because it was Alexander, riding his horse Bucephalus with a double-plumed helmet, leading every charge. His men erupted in cheers and pounded their shields. The warrior is a believer. As Paulo Coelho says, because he believes in miracles, miracles begin to happen. Because he is sure that his thoughts can change his life begins to change. Because he is certain that he will find love, love appears. A warrior is highly tuned to sense danger, but he does not fear. He does not fear because pain is temporary and death an illusion. What is eternal cannot die, and he knows that he will laugh, he will love, and he will fight for all eternity, in this world or some other. If he errs, if he wanders, if he indulges in self-pity, he does not despair. He knows that he is human, and he remembers the choice that he made. He picks his sword back up from the ground and resumes the path of the warrior. A warrior fights for one reason alone: love. Love of life, love of what is good, love of family, love of tribe, and love for his infinite soul on the quest for impeccability. He lets love swell in his heart, flushing through every cell of his being until he can't help but proclaim, like Cyrano de Bergerac, I am going to be a storm, a flame. I need to fight whole armies alone. I have 10 hearts. I have 100 arms. I feel too strong to war with mortals. Bring me